Yo, 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 what's up, internet? Another Republican president, another war in the Middle East. Who is surprised? Not your friendly neighborhood therapist. That's me. My name's Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and hanging out today. We are at war. We being the United States of America and Israel. We're at war with Iran. I'm a mental health professional, not a political scientist with any sort of background in geopolitics. Not really here to wade into that, although it will come up. Today, we're going to talk about why the military is quoting the book of Revelation and having multiple leaders cite some sort of religious holy war as a rationale to bomb schools. If you're new to my work, or maybe you're only watching my stuff on YouTube and don't listen to my podcast, which is Your Therapist Needs Therapy, I did an episode a few weeks ago on the authoritarian family tree here in America, talking about the Christian identity movement, Paul Weirich's machinations behind the scenes, creating the moral majority, and McCarthyism, all sort of leading to the modern monstrosity that is Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. And I think, there are things in that episode, especially around the Christian identity movement, that I talked about, not at length, because I don't think other people care. My interest in neo-Nazis and white supremacy's overlap with the church does seem like a neurodivergent hyperfocus. I'm not the only person who has that hyperfocus. D.L. Mayfield has done a ton of really good work around stuff like that. The Strong-Willed Project has talked a lot about, Dobson and purity culture is pedophile culture, and is still doing a lot of great work. Go check out their work if you haven't. But the deeper you get into some of this stuff, the easier it is, I think, to sound like you got the tinfoil hat on and get a little conspiratorial. I don't think I'm on the blue anon side of things, which is the liberal side of QAnon. But I'm somebody who was raised fundamentalist evangelical, who was taught that the end of the world was a good thing, and that this world doesn't matter and this life doesn't matter beyond making sure you have the right baptismal certificate, so that when this world ends in a fiery apocalypse, you get to go to heaven. And so, I still bump into stuff like this. I've left the church. I've been fully out for about 8 years, maybe a little longer. Time is weird since COVID. And yeah, I still bump into this. I was talking about climate change. I borrowed the snowblower from my dad after a big snowfall last year, which, again, like, climate change here in Wisconsin is very obvious in the fact that we don't have snow much of the winter anymore, but we get these really extreme temperature shifts. It's different than it was 30 years ago when I was a kid. But I was borrowing the snowblower from my dad because he's got a big fancy Wisconsin snowblower, and I have an electric one because I care about the environment. And he said something about, like, climate change ending the world being a good thing because of the Bible. And my dad forgets that I'm not religious, and far more than my mom will still slip in some, like, religious stuff here and there. It wasn't controversial. I didn't respond to it, but it was a reminder that, like, oh yeah, there are people who think millions and billions of people dying horrifically preventable deaths is somehow a good thing because an old dusty book that's mistranslated tells them so. And so, my ears perked up at hearing Pete Hegseth, who has, Crusader tattoos on his body, who is not appalled at killing innocent people in the Middle East, seems to be a fan, even just killing innocent people in general, he seems to be a fan of. When he talked about you know, this being a holy war, it's not good for any country, let alone the largest military on the planet, to have religious zealots in charge of things. That historically, really bad, really bad when religious zealots are in charge of the military, actually. Pretty much always leads to a lot of death and destruction. And, no gods have made an appearance yet. So, for those of you who are unaware, jealous, um, for those of you who are unaware, there is an institution in the military um, for military members to make complaints about their religious rights being affected. And I'm recording, let's see, I'm recording on a Wednesday. This story that I'm citing came out yesterday, which is Tuesday. So between Saturday and Tuesday, more than 400 complaints had been filed to this institution that their commanders, their officers who are higher up in the hierarchy in the military than them, were citing Bible passages, asking them to go to Bible study, and talking about Trump being the anointed one to begin Armageddon. So over 200 complaints in 4 days. That institution did not cite anyone in particular because you have to protect whistleblowers' anonymity, otherwise it doesn't work. And so, but what they did release was over 40 different units were covered in these 200 complaints. And so over 40 different military commanding officers, to some degree, we don't know how high up or high low they or how high up or how high or low up they were. But having people under them abusing their power to promote their own religious ideology, which is not legal, and is also just bad leadership. And I'm not a Christian anymore, but I was raised religious fundamentalist, so I can also tell you is a bad reading of the Bible. Even if you still want to use that as your sort of worldview, what is talked about in the book of Revelation has nothing to do with modern day Iraq, has nothing to do with modern day Iran, has nothing to do with Donald Trump. These are bad readings of the Bible. They've always been apocalyptic visions. Historically, do not have a high success rate. I would put it at 0 since humans still exist. Are there cultures who have been experienced apocalypses of their culture? Sure, right? Like this has an apocalypse that has ruined the planet been proven to be accurate? No, unless the dinosaurs were calling out the comet apocalypse. But no, these things never happen. These things run in cycles. I'll get into that on sort of why this is calming for some people, ironically, and why we don't want those people to be in charge because it shouldn't be. But yeah, I mean, that's also a big number, right? Like 400 complaints in 3 or 4 days is too many for nothing to happen. And nothing will happen, right? Because Pete Hegseth has already committed multiple crimes against humanity in his acting position, and nothing happened. Our Congress is nowhere to be found and can't even get pedophiles prosecuted. So can't even get information on that. So our government isn't working, but it is going around bombing people. So I don't know that that's very new. It's not good. I'm not dismissing it or overlooking it. But when you have Donald Trump, professional grifter, who is not a Christian, seeing Christianity as a very convenient thing, and then sort of, Pete Hegseth and Mike Johnson are both part of the New Apostolic Reform, Doug Wilson's church out of Moscow, Idaho, also famous for a lot of neo-Nazi activity because, the overlap's just right there. That's not a good thing. Doug Wilson is also just a really garbage person. If you want to hear more about Doug Wilson, you can check out my interview with Margaret Bronson. She runs deconstruction doulas, and she was in the Doug Wilson Church. Also did an interview. I don't think that's out yet, but will be coming out soon on CNN regarding what a not great person Doug Wilson is, and why he shouldn't be in charge of anyone. So we have these people who are taking these this very specific, very niche, very extreme, very incorrect reading of the Bible and applying it to their beliefs. And again, we saw this. I didn't do a full episode or a full video on Ted Cruz talking about defending Israel because he's a Christian. So here we are. We're going to get into it. Buckle up, because again, this is one of my hyper focuses. I get a little excited talking about it. It sounds a little crazy when I get too excited talking about it, because it's not an exciting thing. It's really distressing. And humans are weird, and what we can work our brains into making sense is, like, I don't know, fascinating to my brain. So modern day Christianity looks at and this is true not just of the New Apostolic Reform, but the NAR really does get weird with it. Looks at the book of Revelation as being about modern times. In 1888, this also happened. In 1988, this also happened. This is not a new thing. When we look at Christianity and the books of the Bible that are prophetic, it's really tortured. A lot of people have come up with a lot of clever ways to do the math of Daniel to try and say that it hasn't been a failed prophecy, even though it absolutely has been, because the book of Daniel was written. And then they said it was written earlier than it was to make some of the predictions accurate. And then outside of the about 5-10 years where that book was being written, everything else in it is wrong. So with the book of Daniel and with the book of Revelation, the book of Revelation is a mess and is can pretty much say whatever you want it to say. That's true of the Bible writ large, right? If somebody can look at the Bible and say Jesus was a woke leftist socialist, that brown guy from Palestine who said you should give all your money away and take care of the poor, and also Pete Hegseth can say the Bible gives us the right to bomb school children in Iran, like, maybe that book isn't real good at getting its message across if both of those people are citing the same thing. So but anyway, the sort of idea that the end times are upon us is known as premillennial dispensationalism. And again, it's been around for a couple millennia, because we've crossed those thresholds, and surprisingly, the world hasn't ended. I was born on one of them. Not specifically. 1988 was supposed to be a big one. Was supposed to be a world ender. Some Christian had done all the math and figured out it was 1988, and we were at war in the Middle East with the Republican president. Sure, not in 88 specifically, but in the 80s, and so everybody thought the world was ending, and also that, before the millennium. And so, the teaching in the Bible that people are torturing to get to defend their killing of innocent people is that the end times will come. Jesus will return, his second coming, like a porn star. And he comes down and judges everybody and, separates the wheat from the chaff. He says, separates the sheeps and the goats. They don't really talk about how he does that because it doesn't really fit their messaging. But, specifically, he does say, did you feed the hungry, clothe the poor, visit those who are in jail? If you did those things, you get to go to heaven. If you didn't do those things, you get to go to hell, which, would send them all to hell. So they don't spend much time on that, but they do like this idea that Jesus comes back and Armageddon happens. Armageddon as a concept isn't necessarily in the book of Revelation. It is. The end times is the book of Revelation. But Armageddon is, again, this sort of tortured misreading regarding the Battle of Megiddo. again, why do I know this stuff? I don't know, because I took biblical archaeology in high school because I went to a religious private school and was a nerd. I got a bad grade on this paper because my professor didn't like what I had to say about it. Because current archaeology suggests that battle went differently than the Christians want to talk about it now. But oftentimes this is a reference to an actual battle that actually took place, and it was such a devastating battle that it becomes sort of this allegory for the world's ending. And so Armageddon is referencing Megiddo, right? So that's a thing that happened. You can read its Wikipedia page. It's a real thing. What Christians say about it and what they want it to say about the end times doesn't necessarily match up to the historical record, but such is religion, right? Like, religion is not a science and certainly not an accurate history of the world we live in. Zionist Christians, evangelicals, by and large, believe that the Bible says the Israel will need to be a country. Doesn't really get into it. Modern geopolitics do not map well onto the Bible. Again, to get prophecy from thousands of years ago to fit today, you really got to stretch stuff and torture it and turn off all of your thinking brain. And so Christians believe that Israel needs to be a thing. There needs to be war and rumors of war and plague and pestilence and all the things that will happen all the time, because they always have throughout history. So if you want to be a good apocalyptic preacher, keep it general. And then the world will end. And so God comes back, yada, 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 sheep, goats, wheat, chaff, etc. Christian Zionists do not support the country of Israel beyond it being a precursor to the end time. And so when you see Mike Johnson talk about defending Israel, or when you see Mike Johnson acting like we're really great allies with them, he, of all of the Trump administration, seems to be the only person who I think believes it. Hegseth might, but Hegseth is a moron, so it's really hard to tell. I'm just sort of saying he might be a believer because he's so dumb, but I think he's probably just a white supremacist, and so likes to kill brown people. And that's just allegedly, Mike Johnson seems to be hook, line, and sinker what I would expect an evangelical of high power to be, because he lies very obviously. He blushes all the time, and you can tell that he knows he's lying, and he must feel bad about it on some level, because at least his body is giving it away. But when he talks about these things, he will blush. But again, when you're sort of this mindset that the end of the world is a good thing, the ends always justify the means. And so if it means he has to tell a little fib on live TV to defend the pedophile in chief, he'll do that because he truly believes that this gets us to the end of the world, which is a good thing. Now, why I say modern day Christian Zionists are anti-Semitic is because they believe Israel needs to exist so that God can come back and send all the Jews to hell. That's the direct correlation of the end times, is then either the state of Israel is not saved. It's such tortured thinking. And again, this is why I brought up the Christian identity movement episode I did a few weeks ago, talking about the authoritarian American family tree, is because I think and not enough people talk about this. It becomes very important to their theology to understand, well, if Israel isn't being saved, that's all over in the Bible. That's pretty much core concept outside of John 3:16. Which is correct. And so you need to understand the British Israelite movement, which then came to America, which became the Christian identity movement, which is white supremacy, basically suggesting that the lost tribes were apparently British, European people, and now American people. And so that America, which is mentioned specifically 0 times in the Bible, is actually God's chosen people is like, again, this really tortured thing that only makes sense when you can track the white supremacy ideology that took place in the late 1800s into the early 1900s when it moved over to America. And again, like then that tracks with sort of the dispensationalism of like, this is how the world ends and how people get sent where they belong, where they deserve. And so this sets up really horrific atrocities, because not only do you think the people who are dying deserve it because they're non-believers or heathens or apostates or whatever the case may be, but you also believe that they deserve eternal punishment for that. And so it's not a huge step to suggest that then lying on live television is bad, even though the Bible very clearly says don't bear false witness. That's in the 10 big ones. And yet somebody who claims to be a devout Christian and follow the teachers of the Bible can go on TV and lie all the time. Because again, you have to understand that the ends justify the means. When they think they're in the end times, when they think they're in the end game here, that's what they want to do. I think this is probably true for Mike Johnson to some degree. Hegseth just, again, seems to enjoy bombing fishermen off of the coast of Venezuela for no good reason. So might just be a disturbed individual who's incredibly unhinged and enjoys murder. Which hopefully, again, like voting for whoever will prosecute this current regime, it's a lot of war crimes going on. The things going on in Iran, whether they're silly Bible-based things or not, are illegal because the president cannot unilaterally move us into war. A foreign country like Israel certainly cannot move us into war. So none of what is happening is legal. Anybody who was like, the military will stand up to the illegal orders, I'm just gesturing broadly at history again, right? Like that's never actually worked. But apparently, it's higher ups like the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of War, and Speaker of the House. Like that's bad. But then again, to hear that at least 40 different people in the military have decided like this is okay. Now, is it PR spin? Maybe. I think if you're in the right wing echo chamber far enough, you might think that actually a lot of people are Christian. You would be missing a ton of data that suggests that political movements and political identity have far and vastly supplanted religious identity as how people make meaning in their lives. So a lot of Republicans are culturally Christian, but would not be able to tell you what's in the book of Revelation, let alone the book of Daniel. They like identifying as Christians because that lets them think that they're good people, but they are Fox News consumers more than they are fiscal conservatives or Republicans or any sort of Christian. That has been the case since the early 2000s and gotten worse and worse, right? So I think it's one of those things where perhaps a misreading of the room, that some of these true believers really did think this was a winning talking point and would like literally rally the troops. And turns out a lot of people don't want to die and aren't real inclined in another war in the Middle East, because all that has accomplished is a lot of deaths of young people. So, and old people too. I'm not limiting it, but certainly as the imperial force, a lot of our young people died, and we destabilized an entire region and then like pieced out after a lot of our young people died and a lot of their young people and also old people died. So not great. I don't think there's an appetite for this. Again, like Donald Trump has done a lot of horrific things, and making me agree with Nick Fuentes is very low on that list. And also I'm mad about that because, again, neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, who's been platformed by Tucker Carlson and other right-wing talking heads, who's an open, avowed neo-Nazi, came out against the Republicans this week and said vote Democrat in the midterms because he's anti-war, because he's a young person and doesn't want another generation to be going off to war. He also doesn't want to go to war with Israel. He would go to war against Israel because, again, the aforementioned neo-Nazi. And it's such a weird thing because the Republican coalition is a lot of people, mostly, I think, in my heart of hearts, when I try and hold space for humanity not being a lost cause, which is effort. Mostly, I think, is people who have fallen victim to unhinged propaganda for 50 years, let's say. I think that's probably accurate. So, that is a just unmitigated disaster that we've had so much propaganda for so long, where we do really have lived experiences in different realities with our fellow countrymen here in the United States of America. But I do think a lot of Republicans are just woefully misinformed and victims of propaganda. And then the coalition of people who are informed and actually care about some of these things don't agree on very much, which is why you sort of have the Rubio coalition and the Stephen Miller coalition. And then, I think Donald Trump has that cult of personality, unfortunately, for a lot of the propaganda folks who, like, he talks like me, so I'll vote for him. Just again, like, it's uneducated, whether that's because you're an idiot like Donald Trump or because of propaganda leads to the same place, being uneducated. Um, Again, I think people like Stephen Miller are racists, and that's their platform, is making America white again. And so that's the Nick Fuentes crowd. That's the Proud Boys, who are now known as ICE, and that whole coalition. And then you have like some of the older politicians, like Rubio's been in politics for a long time. His thing is like Cuba because of personal reasons, question mark. And that's hardly been covered in the news, that we've done a ton of horrific things in Cuba recently. And so all these people are like hate-based coalitions of who they should be killing, and exerting their power against. And the one thing that sort of ties that together is not a love of Donald Trump, but is Christianity, which is a religion that worships who should we wield our power against, as much as there's a reading that could exist of Jesus as brown guy from Palestine who says, give your money to the poor. Majority of the Bible is, when you have power, this is who you can wield it against. A majority of Christianity is based on in-group, out-group dynamics. That's the thing that fits the Old Testament and the New. And so that's sort of the broad umbrella. A lot of these people are claiming the same thing of Israel needs to be a nation, or, war in the Middle East in general are signs of the end times, and therefore those are good things because the end times mean we get to go to heaven. That's delusional thinking, and that should be disqualifying from holding major office, let alone doing military deployments. So it's bleak, and we lived through this if you were alive for the early 2000s. This is where I move a little bit away from my specialty, right? Like I said, Hegseth and maybe and Mike Johnson for sure seem like real believers and are part of the Doug Wilson philosophy, the New Apostolic Reform, out of Moscow, Idaho. You can look that up and learn more about that stuff. I think Trump is just using this as a distraction. I think he doesn't care that much. To suggest that this is a distraction from the Epstein files seems accurate and valid. I think also the Trump family has taken a ton of money from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia. And so, again, to suggest that like the open and brazen corruption that has happened from 2016 on suggests that, like, again, there are some other players afoot. I don't know how much Trump cares about this beyond it's a distraction in the headlines. I think Trump's mental capacity is so far gone that it doesn't really matter. He's not calling the shots, but certainly convenient distraction from the Epstein files. And also, again, a lot of people have poured a lot of money into the Trump family to get this destabilization going on. And for America to be dropping bombs the way it is, with to the degree it is, so that they don't have to. So it's messy. And again, we're going to see a lot of spiritual bypassing. We're going to see some of this religious language get trotted out again. It doesn't seem like the administration has their messaging on point, but I would almost argue at this point, a year into Trump 2.0, that like that's intentional. They say contradictory things all the time and nothing happens because stuff keeps happening. So whether, Hegseth and Trump both say we're at war, and then a bunch of other people walk that back. Rubio came out and said we got into this to preempt Israel was going to attack them, and if that happened, then Iran would attack us, and so we attacked Iran first, which is like my friend was going to start a food fight, and I knew if a food fight got started that I would get hit with something, so I started the food fight instead, which like I'm married to a teacher and both my parents are teachers. Like that excuse would not fly in middle school, let alone again a geopolitical stage. So a lot of this stuff is illegal, and you have a lot of different people who are trying to take advantage of this. Throw in that 50 some of our senators own stock in the military industrial complex and different companies there. So not good. We're certainly going to see a lot of, again, spiritual bypassing this language. It doesn't need to be consistent for them. I think for people with religious trauma, a lot of my clients that I work with, I would say even for myself, for people who have family members who were injured or died in Iraq, this is all going to be super triggering. A lot of familiar feelings, a lot of that stuff's going to come up. And so just sort of naming and owning that, like, this is an abusive system and it's okay to be enraged by it. That's actually a healthy response. And that feeling of powerlessness is intentional. And so that, like, going and connecting with real people in real time and building community. Capitalism is a man-made system. The military industrial complex is a man-made system. The dismantling of those things will have to come from people organizing into systems for something different, for something better. So I think there's that thing to be aware of. If you're still a religious person, why? But also, why are you? How'd you find me? Hey, hi. But also, what are you doing here? Again, like, this is bad. If you are a true believer, and you're not actively calling this stuff out, and you continue to give your tithes, or you continue to give time, energy, volunteer, whatever for your organization, like, stop it. We got here because evangelicals didn't stand up to Donald Trump. And so, I don't know if you're still there. I don't know what convinces you to leave. I'm not going to do that on a YouTube video. So hopefully there's accountability. I think the global stage is not going to let religious reasoning fly. Our allies are not going to let this fly. Again, we're the bad guys here. We have been for most of history. I saw some statistic about, like, how of our, how many years we've been a country. Our 250, like 244 of those have been at war. So not great. I don't. That's off the top of my head. I don't remember if that was the actual statistic, but it was something like that. And again, the Christianity piece is going to continue. We have a religiously, openly Christian and antagonistic to all of the religions Supreme Court. So, like, accountability, I don't see coming from anywhere other than perhaps the global stage. And then in November, if we have real elections. So fingers crossed. Otherwise, get your passports ready. I would love to have, like, more helpful things, but I do think that's sort of where we're at. This is an active and ongoing resistance. So find your organization and figure out how you can take action. That's what's going to be best for your mental health. But we need to speak coherently. And I think people, especially people who have larger platforms, really need to be well informed on, like, why Christianity is such a big piece of this. This isn't some fringe idea. This is like a core philosophy that ties all these different factions in the Republican Party together. Christianity is the big tent. And whether or not that offends you doesn't really change the fact that that's the thing that we need to be speaking out against. It's the thing that allows for the Epstein ruling class. It's the thing that allows for, technocrat, authoritarian frat bros from Silicon Valley buying elections. Like, again, when you have a philosophy that comes back to the ends justify the means, and that power is all about who you can wield it against, like, you're gonna have abuses of power, obviously. So here we go. Another war in the Middle East with a Republican president. Cut benefits for the poor, cut taxes for the rich, go to war. That's the model for a Republican presidency. I would love to get back to doing like song reviews and fun stuff. Also, I think my title is very clever, but I do just want to clarify that it was Flavor Aid that was used at Jonestown, not Kool-Aid, which maybe I did and I left it because that's sort of where we're at, right? Like instead of the religious institution, certainly like Jim Jones, you know, yes. Certainly the Jonestown reference is pretty funny. I think, again, the idea that Kool-Aid, don't drink the Kool-Aid is like our idiom that we learned from that instead of like, watch out for religious abuses of power. Anyway, I left the Kool-Aid reference. I know it's wrong. I thought it would work better because that's what most people understood. Look at me trying to play nice with the algorithm, he said after swearing a bunch, I'm sure, and not at all being friendly to the algorithm. Be cool to be done with this death cult. All right. If you want to hear me talk about other fun psychological concepts, I do that sometimes when the world's less on fire. Drop down in the comments. Let me know. Like, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. Helps people find my work. If you haven't listened to my podcast, I also post that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Ta-da. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.